the scream that tore through the dusty streets of Rawlins, Wyoming that scorching July afternoon in 1876 would change 2 lives forever, though neither Zelda Hammond nor the accused man knew it yet. Zelda had been carrying a basket of fresh bread from the general store when she heard the commotion outside the sheriff's office. A crowd had gathered, their voices raised in anger, and she felt her stomach clench with unease. The territory had been on edge lately, with cattle going missing from several ranches and tensions running high between settlers and drifters, passing through on their way to the gold fields further west. She pushed through the gathering of townspeople, her green eyes widening at the sight before her. A man stood against the hitching post, his hands bound with rope, blood trickling from a cut above his left eye. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that fell past his collar, and several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw. His clothes were worn but clean, the kind a traveling man might wear when he was trying to make an honest living but had fallen on hard times. What struck her most were his eyes, a remarkable shade of gray that held no guilt, only a weary resignation that made her chest tighten with unexpected sympathy. Sheriff Dalton stood beside him, one hand resting on his gun belt as he addressed the crowd. Found him with Henderson's cattle just north of Beaver Creek, had a running iron in his saddlebag, clear as day what he was up to. String him up, someone shouted from the back of the crowd. Cattle thieves deserve a rope, another voice added. The accused man said nothing, just stood there with his jaw clenched, looking like he had already accepted whatever fate these people decided for him. That resignation bothered Zelda more than anything else. An innocent man would protest, would defend himself, would not, she thought, and then she stopped herself. Or perhaps an innocent man who had been wrongly accused so many times before would simply stop trying to convince people of the truth. Wait. Zelda's voice cut through the angry murmur of the crowd before she could stop herself. Every eye turned toward her, and she felt heat rush to her cheeks, but she pushed forward anyway. Has anyone actually asked him what happened? Sheriff Dalton frowned at her, his bushy eyebrows drawing together. Miss Hammond, this is not women's business. Go on home now. Women's business. Zelda felt her temper flare. Her father had raised her to speak her mind even after he died 3 years ago, leaving her the small house on the edge of town. Justice should be everyone's business, Sheriff. Or are we no longer living in a civilized territory? She turned her attention to the accused man, whose gray eyes had widened slightly at her intervention. What is your name? He hesitated, as if he had not expected anyone to address him directly as a human being. Lucas Quinn, madam. The sound of his voice hit her like a physical thing, low and rough with dust and thirst, but underneath it was something else. Something that resonated in her chest like the deep note of a church bell. She felt an odd flutter in her stomach that she firmly pushed aside. And were you stealing cattle, Mr. Quinn? No, madam. His eyes met hers steadily. I was trailing some horses that broke loose from my camp last night, found them mixed in with those cattle, was just trying to separate them out when the sheriff and his deputy rode up. He is lying, Deputy Morris called out. We all know drifters are nothing but trouble. Where is your proof that he is lying? Zelda challenged, turning to face the deputy. Did you see him with a running iron in his hand? Did you see him actually branding any cattle? Found the iron in his saddlebag, Sheriff Dalton repeated stubbornly. May I see it? Zelda asked. The sheriff looked annoyed but jerked his head toward his deputy, who disappeared into the office and returned moments later with a short iron rod with a straight edge. Zelda took it, examining it carefully. The metal was clean, with no residue of burnt hair or hide that would indicate recent use. This iron is completely clean, she observed, holding it up so the crowd could see. If Mr. Quinn had been branding cattle this morning, there would be evidence on the iron itself. Burnt hair at the very least. Could have cleaned it, someone muttered. With what? Where? Zelda pressed. The sheriff said he caught him with the cattle. When would he have had time to clean it so thoroughly? She saw doubt beginning to creep into some of the faces around her. Sheriff Dalton looked less certain now, his hand dropping from his gun belt. Furthermore, Zelda continued, warming to her argument, if Mr. Quinn were truly a cattle thief, why would he keep the iron in his saddlebag where anyone could find it? Would he not hide it better, or dispose of it entirely once the crime was committed? Lucas Quinn was staring at her now with an expression she could not quite read, something between amazement and a desperate kind of hope. The sound of her voice seemed to have affected him strangely. He had gone very still, his bound hands clenched into fists. The girl makes some fair points. Old Mr. Henderson himself spoke up from the edge of the crowd. He was the rancher whose cattle had supposedly been targeted. I did not actually lose any cattle now that I think on it. They are all accounted for. Was just worried when Dalton said he caught someone with them. Sheriff Dalton's face reddened. The intent was there. The iron was there. But no actual crime was committed, Zelda pointed out firmly. Mr. Henderson's cattle are all present and unharmed. Mr. Quinn says he was looking for his horses. Where are they now? 3 horses tied up behind the office, Deputy Morris admitted reluctantly. 2 bays and a paint, not branded. Not branded, Zelda repeated. So Mr. Quinn owns horses that are not branded, yet you are accusing him of cattle rustling with a running iron. Does that make logical sense to anyone here? The crowd had grown quiet now, the angry energy dissipating like steam. Lucas Quinn continued to stare at her, and every time she glanced his way, that strange flutter returned to her stomach. Sheriff Dalton cleared his throat, clearly trying to save face. Well, even if he was not rustling today, that does not mean he is not planning to. You cannot arrest a man for what he might do, Zelda said firmly. This is still America. We have laws even out here, or have we become no better than vigilantes? That struck a nerve. Rawlins was trying to establish itself as a proper town, with law and order, not the wild frontier justice that had characterized the earlier years of the territory. Several of the more prominent townspeople began nodding, clearly uncomfortable with the direction things had been heading. "Cut him loose," Mr. Henderson said finally. "The girl is right. No crime was actually committed against me, and I will not have it said that I pressed charges against an innocent man." Sheriff Dalton looked like he wanted to argue, but he was outnumbered now. With obvious reluctance, he drew his knife and cut the ropes binding Lucas Quinn's wrists. Lucas rubbed his wrists, his eyes never leaving Zelda's face. "Get your horses and move on," the sheriff growled. "And do not let me catch you near any cattle again, or next time there will not be a soft-hearted woman to speak up for you." The crowd began to disperse, people drifting back to their business now that the excitement was over. Zelda stood rooted to the spot, suddenly aware that she was trembling slightly. She had never done anything like that before, never spoken out so boldly in front of so many people. Her father would have been proud, she thought, but he also would have warned her about the consequences of making enemies of men like Sheriff Dalton. Lucas Quinn approached her slowly, as if he were afraid she might startle and run. Up close, she could see that he was probably around 26 or 27, not much older than her own 22 years. The cut above his eye had stopped bleeding, but it would probably leave a scar. His gray eyes were extraordinary, she realized, flecked with darker charcoal around the edges. "Madam," he said, and his voice was even more affecting at this distance, "I do not know how to thank you. You saved my life today." "I only spoke the truth," Zelda replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "They had no real evidence against you. Out here, evidence does not always matter." He gestured vaguely at the dispersing crowd. "A stranger's word against locals rarely goes well for the stranger. You put yourself at risk, speaking up for me like that." "I could not stand by and watch an injustice," she said simply. "My father taught me that silence in the face of wrong is the same as condoning it." Lucas smiled then, a small, crooked thing that transformed his whole face. "Your father raised you right. Lucas Quinn, madam, in case you did not catch it properly before. Zelda Hammond." She shifted her basket to her other arm, suddenly aware that she was standing in the street talking to a strange man, and several of the town's busybodies were watching with great interest. "You should get that cut cleaned. It could become infected." "I will manage," he said, but he swayed slightly on his feet, and Zelda realized he had probably been roughed up worse than just the visible cut. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, and now that she looked closer, she could see the beginning of bruises along his jaw. Before she could think better of it, she said, "My house is just at the edge of town, the small one with the blue shutters. I have medical supplies there. At least let me clean that wound properly." Lucas looked startled, then uncertain. "Madam, I could not. Your reputation is already going to be the subject of gossip after today," Zelda said practically. "Another 10 minutes will not make much difference. Besides, it is the Christian thing to do, helping someone who is injured." She saw him waver, and then he nodded slowly. "If you are certain." "I do not want to cause you any more trouble." "Then come along before I change my mind," she said briskly, starting to walk toward her house. She heard his footsteps behind her, slightly uneven, confirming her suspicion that he had been hurt worse than was immediately obvious. Her house was indeed small, just 3 rooms and a kitchen, but it was clean and comfortable. She had inherited it from her father, along with a small amount of money that she had been carefully stretching for the past 3 years by taking in sewing and doing bookkeeping for some of the local businesses. It was not much, but it was hers, and it was paid for. She set her basket on the kitchen table and pointed Lucas toward the wash basin. "Clean the dust off first. I will get the medical supplies." When she returned from her bedroom with the small box of bandages and salves, she found him standing by the basin, his shirt removed, revealing more bruises across his ribs. He had been washing his face and had not heard her enter. She caught her breath at the sight of him, lean and muscled from hard work, and felt heat rush to her face again. She cleared her throat and he turned quickly, reaching for his shirt. "Leave it," she said. "Those ribs need to be checked. Sit down at the table," he obeyed, moving carefully. She approached with the medical supplies, trying to maintain a professional distance even as her heart beat faster. She had helped her father tend injuries before, when he was the town's informal doctor before his heart gave out, so this was nothing new. Except it felt entirely different with Lucas Quinn watching her with those steady gray eyes. She cleaned the cut above his eye first, her touch as gentle as she could make it. He barely flinched, though she knew it must have stung. "How did this happen?" "Deputy Morris's rifle butt," Lucas said quietly, "when I tried to explain about the horses." Anger flared through her again. "They had no right." "They had every right, madam. I am nobody, just a drifter. You, on the other hand, stood up to the sheriff and half the town for a complete stranger." "That took courage, or foolishness," Zelda murmured, applying salve to the cut. "I am sure I will hear about it tomorrow." "Why did you do it?" His voice was soft, genuinely curious. "You did not know me. For all you knew, I could have been guilty." Zelda paused, considering the question. "I looked in your eyes," she said finally. "I saw resignation there, but not guilt. A guilty man would have been angry or afraid or defiant. You just looked tired, like you had been through this before and knew how it would end." "I have," Lucas admitted. "Been accused of things I did not do, I mean. It comes with the territory when you are always moving, always the outsider. Easier to blame the stranger than look at your own neighbors." She moved to examine his ribs, her fingers gentle but thorough. He sucked in a breath when she pressed on one spot, and she frowned. "You might have a cracked rib here. You need to be careful for the next few weeks, let it heal properly." "I will be moving on tomorrow," Lucas said. "Cannot stay in a place where the law has already decided I am trouble." Something twisted in Zelda's chest at his words, a sharp disappointment that surprised her with its intensity. "Where will you go?" "West, probably, or north toward Montana. There is always work for someone willing to do it, and I am not particular." He paused. "What about you?" "You have family here?" "No. My father died 3 years ago. My mother passed when I was young." She finished bandaging his ribs, trying to ignore how warm his skin felt under her hands. "I manage on my own." Lucas was quiet for a moment. When she looked up, she found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "The moment you spoke," he said slowly, "out there in the street, the moment I heard your voice, it was like something inside me recognized something in you. Like I had been walking toward you my whole life without knowing it." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and true all at once. Zelda felt them resonate in her own chest, confirming something she had been trying not to acknowledge since the moment she had pushed through that angry crowd. "That is impossible," she whispered. "We have only just met." "I know." He reached up, his hand hovering near her face but not quite touching. "But I know it anyway, as sure as I know my own name. You are the reason I survived today, not just because you spoke up, but because I was meant to meet you, to hear your voice. To know that somewhere in this world there was someone who would see me as I really am." Zelda's hand trembled as she set down the bandages. "I do not even know you." "Then let me stay," Lucas said, his voice urgent now. "Let me stay in Rawlins, get to know you properly. I am good with horses, good with my hands. I can find work. I can prove to this town that I am not what they think I am." "The sheriff will make your life miserable," Zelda warned, but her heart was beating fast with hope. "I do not care." Lucas stood carefully, mindful of his injuries. "I have been drifting for 8 years, since I was 18 and left my father's farm in Kansas. Never found a reason to stop anywhere for more than a few weeks. Never found anything worth staying for." He looked at her intently. "Until now. Until you." Zelda knew she should send him away, should protect herself from the gossip and the complications. But when she looked at Lucas Quinn, when she heard the absolute certainty in his voice, she felt something shift inside her, like a door she had not known was locked suddenly swinging open. "There is a stable at the edge of town," she heard herself say. "Old Mr. Peterson runs it. He has been looking for help since his son moved to Denver. If you are serious about staying, about proving yourself, that would be a place to start." The smile that spread across Lucas's face was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I am serious. More serious than I have ever been about anything in my life." "Then you should go see him tomorrow morning," Zelda said, trying to sound practical even as her heart raced. "But for tonight, you need rest. There is a boarding house on Main Street run by Mrs. Crawford. Tell her I sent you. She is fair-minded and will not turn you away." Lucas pulled his shirt back on carefully, wincing as the fabric brushed his bandaged ribs. "Thank you for everything. For believing in me when nobody else would." "I just spoke the truth," Zelda said again, but this time it felt like more than that. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. He paused at the door, turning back to look at her one more time. "I meant what I said. About your voice, about knowing. I will prove myself to this town, prove that I am worth taking a chance on." And then, if you will let me, I would like to know everything about you, Zelda Hammond." After he left, Zelda stood in her kitchen for a long time, her hands pressed against the table, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She had lived a quiet, careful life for 3 years, ever since her father's death. She had learned to be self-sufficient, to not need anyone. And now, in the space of a single afternoon, a stranger with gray eyes had walked into her life and made her feel things she had never expected to feel. The gossip started the next morning, as she had known it would. When Zelda went to the general store for flour, the conversation stopped as soon as she entered, only to resume in urgent whispers the moment she passed. At the post office, Mrs. Abernethy gave her a tight-lipped look of disapproval. Even at the church social that Sunday, several of the women made pointed comments about young ladies who did not know their place. But Zelda held her head high and went about her business. She had done nothing wrong, and she refused to be ashamed of speaking up for justice. Lucas, true to his word, had gone to see Mr. Peterson about work at the stable. The old man, who had known Zelda's father and respected his daughter, had agreed to give Lucas a chance. Within a week, Lucas had proven himself so capable with horses that even Peterson's initial skepticism had melted away. "That Quinn fellow," the old man told Zelda when she stopped by to deliver his mended shirts, "he has a real gift. Gentled that mean roan mare nobody else could get near. Got her eating out of his hand in 3 days." Zelda tried not to smile too broadly. "I am glad he is working out." "You were right about him," Peterson said, giving her a knowing look. "Not that I doubted you, but there were plenty who did. Seems he is proving them wrong one day at a time." She saw Lucas in passing over the next few weeks, always with a respectful distance between them that somehow felt more intimate than if he had been standing close. He would tip his hat to her on the street, his eyes holding hers for just a moment longer than was strictly proper. She would nod back, her heart doing that strange flutter thing that seemed to happen every time she caught sight of him. They did not speak privately again until nearly a month after their first meeting. Zelda was walking home from the seamstress shop where she had delivered some finished work when she heard hoofbeats behind her. She turned to find Lucas on a beautiful black horse, the evening sun painting golden highlights in his dark hair. "Miss Hammond," he said, swinging down from the saddle. "May I walk with you? People will talk," Zelda said, but she was already smiling. "People are already talking," Lucas pointed out, falling into step beside her, leading his horse. "At least this way we can give them something accurate to talk about." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before Lucas spoke again. "I wanted to thank you properly, for giving me a chance to prove myself. Mr. Peterson says I am doing well, and he has even offered to let me sleep in the room above the stable. Says it is better than the boarding house and the rent is cheaper." "That is wonderful," Zelda said, genuinely pleased. "I told you he was fair-minded." "You also said the sheriff would make my life miserable," Lucas reminded her. "You were right about that too. He stops by the stable at least once a week, looking for any excuse to run me out of town." "Has he found any?" "Not yet." Lucas grinned. "I have been on my best behavior. Pay my bills on time, do not drink more than a single beer at the saloon, attend church every Sunday. I am the most respectable citizen Rawlins has ever seen." Zelda laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise them both. She had not laughed much in the past 3 years. "Are you finding it terribly boring?" "Not at all." His voice dropped lower. "Because every day I get to see you. Even if it is just in passing, even if we do not speak, just knowing you are here makes everything worth it." They had reached her house now, and Zelda stopped at the gate, suddenly shy. "Would you like to come in for supper? I have a stew cooking, more than enough for 2. The invitation hung between them, loaded with significance they both understood. If Lucas came inside, if neighbors saw his horse tied outside her house in the evening, the gossip would intensify. But if he did not, if they continued this distant, proper dance, they would never truly get to know each other. Lucas seemed to be thinking the same thing. "Are you sure? I do not want to damage your reputation further." "My reputation has survived worse," Zelda said firmly. "And I would like very much to have your company, properly, so we can talk." "Then I would be honored," Lucas said, tying his horse to her fence post. That evening was the first of many. Lucas became a regular visitor to Zelda's small house, always careful to leave before full dark fell, always maintaining proper decorum. They talked about everything, their conversations ranging from the mundane to the profound. Zelda learned that Lucas had left home after his father had tried to force him into a marriage with a neighbor's daughter, a girl he did not love. He had been drifting ever since, working ranch jobs and breaking horses, never staying long enough to put down roots. "I was waiting," he told her one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I did not know what I was waiting for, but I knew I had not found it yet." "And now?" Zelda asked softly. "Now I have found it." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes intense. "I have found you, and I am never leaving, not unless you tell me to go." Zelda felt tears prick her eyes. "I do not want you to go." Lucas reached out, taking her hand in his. It was the first time he had touched her since that day in her kitchen, and the contact sent warmth spreading through her whole body. His hands were calloused from work, strong and gentle all at once. "I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "I think I started falling the moment I heard your voice in that crowd, standing up for me when nobody else would. Every day since then I have fallen a little bit more." "Lucas," she whispered, and his name on her lips felt like a prayer. "You do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I know this is fast. I know people will think I am not good enough for you, and maybe they are right. But I need you to know. I need you to understand that this is real for me." "It is real for me too," Zelda said, her voice trembling slightly. "I do not understand it. I do not know how this happened so quickly. But when I am with you, I feel more myself than I have in years, like I can breathe properly again." Lucas squeezed her hand. "Then we will face the gossips together. We will prove to this town that we are serious, that this is not some passing fancy." "How?" Zelda asked practically. "Sheriff Dalton still does not trust you. Half the town thinks you are a drifter who will leave the moment something better comes along." "Then I will stay," Lucas said with quiet determination. "I will stay and work hard and become part of this community. I will save my money and build a life here. And when enough time has passed, when I have proven myself beyond any doubt, I will ask you to marry me." Zelda's breath caught. "Lucas, I know it is too soon to ask now," he said, "but I want you to know my intentions. I want you to know where this is heading, at least from my side. I am not playing games with your heart, Zelda. I am in this for the long term." "Then so am I," she said firmly. "But you should know I am not the easiest person to live with. I speak my mind even when I should not. I have opinions on everything. My father used to say I was too stubborn for my own good." Lucas smiled. "I know. That is what I love about you. Your courage, your conviction. The fact that you will stand up for what is right even when it costs you. Those are not flaws, Zelda. They are the things that make you extraordinary." They sat together on the porch until the stars came out, hands clasped, planning a future that had seemed impossible just weeks before. When Lucas finally left, mounting his horse and riding back toward town, Zelda stood watching him go, her heart full in a way it had not been since her father died. The seasons changed, summer giving way to autumn and then to a harsh Wyoming winter. Lucas continued working at the stable, his reputation slowly shifting as people saw his steady work ethic and honest dealings. Mr. Peterson sang his praises to anyone who would listen, and gradually, more people began to give Lucas a chance. He helped repair the church roof before the snow came, worked extra hours to help a family whose barn had burned down, and generally made himself indispensable to the community. Zelda watched him integrate himself into Rawlins society with quiet pride. They still ate supper together several times a week, though always with proper chaperonage now that Mrs. Peterson had taken it upon herself to ensure the young couple's reputation remained intact. The old woman had become their unlikely champion, often inviting them both to Sunday dinners and making sure everyone knew that Lucas Quinn was courting Zelda Hammond in a completely respectable manner. Not everyone was pleased by this development. Sheriff Dalton continued to regard Lucas with suspicion, and Deputy Morris made snide comments whenever they crossed paths. But even their opposition began to soften as the months passed, and Lucas continued to prove himself a valuable member of the community. Winter brought its own challenges. The temperature dropped below freezing for weeks at a time, and snow piled high in the streets. Zelda's small income from sewing dropped as fewer people wanted to venture out for fittings and alterations. She tried to hide her worry, but Lucas noticed, as he seemed to notice everything about her. "I have been saving," he told her one evening in January as they sat by her fireplace, Mrs. Peterson dozing in the corner chair that served as their chaperone. "Let me help with your expenses until spring." "I cannot take your money," Zelda protested, though the offer touched her deeply. "Why not? We are going to be married, are we not?" Lucas kept his voice low so as not to wake their chaperone. "What is mine will be yours, and what is yours will be mine. We are just starting a bit early, that is all." "We are not engaged yet," Zelda pointed out, though her heart beat faster at the words. "Not officially," Lucas agreed. "But in every way that matters, you are already mine and I am already yours. Have been since that first day when I heard your voice and knew my life had just changed forever." Zelda felt tears prick her eyes. "How do you always know exactly what to say?" "Because it is the truth," Lucas said simply. "I have never been good with pretty words, Zelda, but I am good at meaning what I say, and I mean this. I love you, I will always love you. And as soon as I have saved enough to buy us a proper piece of land, I am going to ask you to marry me in front of this whole town." "I will say yes," Zelda whispered. "Just so you know, when you ask, I will say yes." Lucas's smile was brilliant. "Then I will work twice as hard to make it happen sooner." True to his word, Lucas took on extra work that winter, breaking horses for ranchers preparing for spring, repairing tack and saddles in the evening, anything that would add to his savings. Zelda watched him work himself nearly to exhaustion and loved him all the more for his dedication to building their future. Spring came late that year, arriving in April with sudden warmth that melted the snow and turned the streets to mud. With it came new challenges. A group of rough men rode into town, claiming to be working for a cattle company out of Montana. They were loud and aggressive, causing trouble at the saloon and making people nervous. Lucas had just finished working with a particularly difficult horse when the men showed up at the stable. Zelda had stopped by to bring Lucas his lunch, and she was there when the leader of the group, a mean-looking man with a scar running down his cheek, demanded service. "Need our horses rashad," he said, looking Lucas up and down with obvious contempt. "Think you can manage that, stable boy?" Lucas's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "I can do it. Going to cost you $2 per horse." $2, the man laughed. "I will give you one." "Then you can take your horses somewhere else," Lucas said calmly. $2 is the standard rate." The scarred man stepped closer, his hand dropping to his gun. "I do not think you heard me right. Before things could escalate, Zelda stepped forward. "I heard him just fine, and so did you. The rate is $2 per horse. If that is too expensive for you, there is another stable in Laramie, about 40 miles west." The man's eyes shifted to her, and something ugly crossed his face. "Well, look at this. Stable boy has a woman fighting his battles for him." "The lady was just stating facts," Lucas said, and there was steel in his voice now. "And if you speak to her with disrespect again, we are going to have a problem that has nothing to do with horseshoes." The tension in the stable was palpable. Zelda held her breath, aware that things could turn violent in an instant. But before anything could happen, Mr. Peterson appeared from the back room, a shotgun in his hands. "You boys causing trouble?" the old man asked mildly. The scarred man looked at the shotgun, then at Lucas's set face, and apparently decided it was not worth the fight. "We will find another stable," he muttered, turning to leave. His companions followed, and soon the sound of their horses faded into the distance. Lucas let out a long breath, turning to Zelda with concern written all over his face. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," Zelda said, though her hands were shaking slightly. "Are you?" "Better now that they are gone." He glanced at Mr. Peterson. "Thank you for the backup." "That is what I am here for," the old man said, lowering the shotgun. "Those men are trouble. I have heard about them, cattle company men who use intimidation to get what they want. You did right, standing your ground." But the incident left Zelda unsettled. That night, as she lay in bed, she could not shake the feeling that those men would cause more problems before they left Rawlins. Her intuition proved correct when, 3 days later, a ranch hand was found beaten half to death on the road outside town. He had refused to sell his small herd to the cattle company men, and they had taken their revenge. The town was in an uproar. Sheriff Dalton formed a posse to track down the men, but they had already moved on, leaving fear and anger in their wake. The injured ranch hand would survive, but his injuries would take months to heal, and his small operation was now in jeopardy. Lucas heard about the situation and immediately offered to help. He spent his evenings for the next 2 weeks helping manage the injured man's cattle, asking for no payment, just doing what needed to be done. Zelda went with him when she could, bringing food and helping the man's wife with household tasks. The whole town noticed. The same people who had been ready to hang Lucas a year ago now saw him working tirelessly to help one of their own. It was a turning point, the moment when Lucas Quinn truly became part of Rawlins rather than just a man who lived there. One evening in late May, as Zelda and Lucas walked back from the injured rancher's property, Lucas suddenly stopped. They were standing on a small rise overlooking the town, the setting sun painting everything gold. "This is it," he said quietly. "This is what?" Zelda asked. Lucas turned to face her, and in his eyes, she saw nervous excitement. "This is the moment I have been working toward. This is when I ask you." Zelda's breath caught as Lucas dropped to one knee right there on the dusty road, taking her hand in both of his. "Zelda Hammond, I came to this town a year ago with nothing but a horse and a prayer. I was wrongly accused, beaten, and would probably have been hanged if not for you. You saw me when nobody else would. You heard my truth. You gave me a chance to prove myself. And in the process, I fell in love with you so completely that I cannot remember what my life was like before you were in it." His voice was rough with emotion. "I do not have much to offer you. I have saved enough to buy a small piece of land outside town, enough to start a horse ranch of our own. It will be hard work and we will struggle at first, but I promise you this, I will work every day to make you happy. I will honor you, respect you, and love you until my dying breath. Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Zelda's face. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I will marry you, Lucas Quinn. I love you. I have loved you since that first day when you stood there looking at me like I had given you back hope. You are the bravest, kindest, most determined man I have ever known, and I would be honored to be your wife." Lucas stood and swept her into his arms, kissing her with all the pent-up passion of a year's worth of proper courting. Zelda kissed him back, feeling like every piece of her life had finally fallen into place. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I do not have a ring yet," Lucas said, looking embarrassed. "I put all my money toward the land payment, but I will get you one, I promise." "I do not need a ring," Zelda said firmly. "I just need you." They were married a month later, in June of 1877, exactly 1 year after Lucas had been accused of cattle rustling. The ceremony was held in the small church, with half the town in attendance. Even Sheriff Dalton showed up, looking uncomfortable but present. Mr. Peterson walked Zelda down the aisle, tears in his eyes as he gave her away. Zelda wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair. Lucas stood at the altar in his best clothes, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked toward him. When the preacher asked if anyone had objections, there was silence. The entire town had come to accept what Zelda had known from the beginning. Lucas Quinn was an honest man who had been given a second chance and made the most of it. "I do," Lucas said when his turn came, his voice strong and clear. "I do," Zelda echoed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed her tenderly and the church erupted in applause. They walked out into the sunshine together, hand in hand, ready to start their new life. The land Lucas had bought was 15 acres of good grazing land with a small creek running through it, about 3 miles outside Rawlins. There was no house yet, just an old barn that needed repairs, but Lucas had plans. They spent their wedding night at Zelda's house in town one last time, and then Lucas got to work building their home. He worked on the house every spare moment, sometimes by lamplight after his regular work at Peterson's stable was done. Zelda helped when she could, learning to use a hammer and saw, her hands developing calluses alongside his. The townspeople noticed their efforts, and several of the men started showing up on weekends to help. Even some who had been among the angriest the day Lucas was accused came to lend a hand, won over by his steady character and obvious devotion to his new wife. By August, they had a small but sturdy house with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a sitting room. It was not much compared to some of the grand houses in town, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and the help of a community that had finally accepted them. Zelda sold her father's house in town, using the money to buy their first breeding stock, 3 good mares with excellent bloodlines. Lucas's reputation with horses had spread, and people were already asking if he would take on training work. Their horse ranch, which they named Hope Springs Ranch after the creek that ran through their property, began to take shape. The first year of marriage was full of hard work and simple joys. Zelda learned to cook over a wood stove, to manage a household budget stretched thin, to handle horses with the gentle confidence Lucas taught her. Lucas learned to share his life with someone, to trust that Zelda would not leave, that this home they were building was permanent. They worked side by side every day, breaking horses, building fences, planting a garden. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch, watching the sunset, Lucas's arm around Zelda's shoulders, both of them tired but content. "Are you happy?" Lucas asked her one evening in September as the air began to turn crisp with the promise of fall. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Zelda replied honestly. "Are you?" "I did not know life could be like this," Lucas said quietly. "Peaceful, safe. Coming home to the same place every night, to the same person. Having someone who knows me, really knows me and loves me anyway. I spent so many years drifting, looking for something I could not name. And now I know what it was. It was you. It was this. It was home. Zelda turned in his arms to kiss him. You are my home too. You have been since the moment I heard your voice and decided I could not let them hurt you. Something in me just knew. I knew too, Lucas murmured against her lips. I looked at you standing there in that crowd, speaking up for a stranger, and I thought, this is the woman I am going to spend my life with. I did not know how it would happen, but I knew it was true. Their first winter at Hope Springs Ranch was harsh, but they weathered it together, keeping each other warm through the long, cold nights. Spring came again, and with it, new life. 2 of their mares foaled successfully, giving them their first home-bred horses. Lucas was in his element, caring for the new foals with gentle expertise that made Zelda fall in love with him all over again. It was in late spring, nearly 2 years after their wedding, that Zelda realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had waited to be sure before telling Lucas. When she finally did, as they were walking through their pastures checking the fence lines, he stopped dead in his tracks. A baby. His voice was filled with wonder. We are going to have a baby. In the fall, Zelda confirmed, smiling at his stunned expression. Probably October. Lucas let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around carefully before setting her down. A baby. We are going to be parents. Zelda, this is amazing. This is perfect. We need to build another room onto the house. We need to get a cradle. We need to breathe, Zelda said, laughing at his enthusiasm. We have months to prepare, Lucas. Plenty of time. But Lucas was not to be calmed. He threw himself into preparing for their child with the same single-minded determination he brought to everything else. He built a beautiful cradle from carefully selected wood, sanded so smooth there was not a single rough edge. He added a 3rd bedroom onto their house, working late into the evenings. He saved extra money from every training job to make sure they would have enough when the baby came. Zelda watched him prepare their nest, her heart overflowing with love. She continued working as long as she could, though Lucas worried constantly about her overexerting herself. The townswomen, including Mrs. Peterson, rallied around her, bringing gifts and advice. Even women who had gossiped about her 2 years ago now welcomed her warmly, impressed by how the Quinns had built their ranch from nothing. Their son was born in early October of 1878, a healthy baby boy with Lucas's dark hair and Zelda's green eyes. They named him James, after Zelda's father, with a middle name of Lucas after his father. The birth was difficult, and for a few hours, Lucas had paced outside their bedroom, his face white with fear, while the midwife and Mrs. Peterson attended Zelda. But when he was finally allowed in, when he saw Zelda sitting up in bed with their son in her arms, tears streamed down his face. He approached slowly, as if afraid to disturb them, and then sat carefully on the edge of the bed. He is perfect, Lucas whispered, touching their son's tiny hand with one finger. You are perfect. Thank you for this gift. He has your nose, Zelda said, exhausted but radiant. And your eyes, Lucas replied. He is going to be stubborn and brave and absolutely fearless. Just like his mother. I hope he has your kindness, Zelda murmured, your determination, your ability to start over when life knocks you down. They sat together, the 3 of them, as evening fell and lamplight flickered softly in the room. Lucas was afraid to hold the baby at first, certain his rough hands would somehow hurt the delicate infant. But Zelda insisted, showing him how to support the small head, how to cradle him securely. When Lucas finally held his son for the first time, something shifted in his face, a deepening of the love and commitment that already defined him. I promise you, he said softly to the baby. "I will give you a good life, a stable life. You will always know where home is. You will always be safe and loved. You will never wonder if you belong, never have to drift looking for where you fit, because you fit right here with us, always." Zelda wiped away tears, knowing Lucas was making promises not just to their son, but to the boy he himself had once been, the one who had left home searching for something he could not name. Life at Hope Springs Ranch developed a new rhythm with baby James. Zelda discovered depths of exhaustion she had not known were possible, but also joy so profound it sometimes made her breathless. Lucas threw himself into fatherhood with the same wholehearted devotion he brought to everything, getting up for night feedings, walking the floor with a colicky baby, changing diapers without complaint. Their ranch continued to grow. Lucas's reputation as a horse trainer spread throughout Wyoming and into neighboring territories. People came from as far as Montana and Colorado to have him work with their animals. He developed a technique that relied on patience and understanding rather than breaking the horse's spirit, and it produced results that amazed even experienced horsemen. Zelda kept their books, managed their household, and eventually began raising chickens and maintaining a larger garden. She had learned to do more with less during those first hard years, and now that they had a bit more financial stability, she made sure they saved carefully, remembering the lean times. James grew into a bright, active toddler with his mother's quick mind and his father's gentle way with animals. By the time he was 2, he was already following his father around the ranch, learning to approach horses properly, sitting on the fence to watch his father work. One evening in the summer of 1881, when James was almost 3, Zelda told Lucas she was pregnant again. This time, the news brought quiet joy rather than wild excitement, a deep contentment in the family they were building together. Their daughter was born the following spring, a tiny thing with gray eyes like her father and dark hair like both her parents. They named her Grace, and she was a peaceful baby compared to her active older brother. James was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything, patting her small head with careful toddler hands. The years passed, each one building on the last. The ranch prospered, their reputation growing. Lucas took on a young apprentice to help with the training work, a quiet boy from town who showed promise with horses. Zelda expanded her chicken operation and began selling eggs and poultry in Rawlins, adding to their income. They added more rooms to the house as their family grew, expanded the barn, built a proper stable for the horses they were training. The land that had been rough pasture when they bought it was now well tended, with solid fences and good grazing. Hope Springs Ranch became known throughout the territory as a place where people were treated fairly, and horses were handled with expertise and care. James grew into a serious boy who loved books as much as horses, often reading to his little sister in the evenings. Grace was gentle and thoughtful, with her father's gift for understanding animals. Watching their children grow, Lucas and Zelda often marveled at how their lives had turned out. "You remember that day?" Lucas asked one evening when they were alone on the porch, the children finally asleep. It was July of 1884, 8 years after they had first met. "When you pushed through that crowd and spoke up for me, I remember everything about that day," Zelda said, leaning against his shoulder. "I remember how angry I was at the injustice. I remember looking at you and seeing resignation in your eyes. I remember the moment I decided I could not stay silent. I remember hearing your voice," Lucas said softly, "and knowing, absolutely knowing, that you were going to change my life. I had no idea how, but I knew it with complete certainty." "I felt it too," Zelda admitted. "It terrified me. I had been so careful for 3 years, keeping to myself, not taking risks, and then there you were, and suddenly I was taking the biggest risk of my life. Was it worth it?" Lucas asked, though the smile in his voice suggested he knew the answer. "Every moment," Zelda said firmly. "Every hard day, every struggle, every time we did not know if we would make it. All of it was worth it to be here now, with you and our children in this life we built together." Lucas kissed the top of her head. "I never told you what Sheriff Dalton said to me last week, did I?" "No, what?" "He stopped by to have me look at his horse's leg, the one that has been giving him trouble. And while I was working, he said, 'Quinn, I was wrong about you. Wrong to assume the worst, wrong to treat you the way I did. Your wife saw what the rest of us were too blind to see. This town is better for having you in it." Lucas paused. Coming from him, that meant something. "You earned that respect," Zelda said. "Every day for 8 years, you have proven yourself to be exactly who I knew you were from the beginning. A good man. An honest man. The best man I have ever known." "I am only that man because you believed I could be," Lucas replied. "You gave me a reason to stay, to fight, to prove myself. Before you, I was just drifting. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over their land, their home, their life together. In the distance, they could hear the horses moving in the pasture, the sound of night birds calling. Inside, their children slept safely. Time continued its steady march. More children came, 2 more boys over the next several years, filling their home with noise and laughter. The house grew again to accommodate everyone, sprawling across the property with additions built as needed. The ranch expanded too, adding more acres, more horses, more buildings. James, their eldest, grew into a tall young man with a love for law and justice that his parents said came from the story of how they met. He left for university in Denver when he was 18, planning to become a lawyer, but he always came home for holidays, bringing his learning and his enthusiasm back to the family. Grace developed her father's gift with horses even more strongly than her brothers. By the time she was 12, she could gentle a wild horse as well as any adult, working beside her father with quiet competence. Zelda watched her daughter work and saw the same determination, the same courage that had driven her to speak up for a stranger all those years ago. The younger boys, Thomas and William, were inseparable, always getting into mischief but with good hearts underneath the boyish energy. They kept their parents young, Lucas often said, chasing after them and trying to keep them out of trouble. As the 1880s drew to a close, Rawlins grew from a rough frontier town into a proper city. The railroad came through, bringing more people, more commerce, more civilization. Hope Springs Ranch, once on the outskirts, was now surrounded by other successful ranches and farms. The Quinns were pillars of the community, their story known to everyone, a tale that gave hope to other newcomers that they too could make a place for themselves. Lucas was in his 40s now, his dark hair showing threads of silver, his face lined from years of sun and wind. But he was still strong, still capable, still the man who had promised to work every day to make Zelda happy. And he had kept that promise. Zelda, too, showed the marks of time and hard work, but she carried them with grace. Her green eyes were as sharp as ever, and she still spoke her mind when she saw injustice, though now people listened with respect rather than dismissal. She managed their increasingly complex business affairs with the same practical intelligence she had shown that first day, keeping their family financially secure through careful planning and wise investments. One day in the spring of 1890, when Zelda was 42 and Lucas was 48, they received unexpected visitors. A young couple arrived at Hope Springs Ranch, dusty from travel, asking for Lucas Quinn. The young man had been accused of horse theft in a town to the north, had escaped before being lynched, and had heard that Lucas Quinn in Rawlins had once been in a similar situation. "They said you were wrongly accused," the young man said desperately, his arm around his frightened wife. "They said someone spoke up for you, gave you a chance to prove yourself. I am hoping, maybe, you could do the same for us. Help us prove I did not do this." Lucas looked at Zelda, and in his eyes, she saw the memory of that day 14 years ago when he had stood accused and she had been his only defender. She nodded slightly, and Lucas turned back to the young couple. "Tell me what happened," he said kindly. "Everything. Start from the beginning." They listened as the young man told his story, which was painfully similar to Lucas's own. He had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, had been assumed guilty because he was a stranger, had been nearly hanged by an angry mob. He and his wife had fled in the night, coming to Rawlins on the recommendation of a sheriff who had heard of Lucas Quinn and thought he might help. When the story was finished, Lucas said, "You will stay here while we sort this out. We have room and you will be safe. Tomorrow, I will ride to your town and speak to the authorities, see what can be done to clear your name." "We cannot pay you," the wife said, tears in her eyes. "I am not asking for payment," Lucas said gently. 14 years ago, someone took a chance on me when nobody else would." She saw past the accusations to the truth underneath. "The least I can do is extend that same chance to others who find themselves in similar circumstances." He did exactly that. Lucas rode to the neighboring town, bringing Zelda with him, and together they investigated the horse theft, asking questions, looking at evidence, using the same logic that had saved Lucas all those years ago. Within a week, they had found the actual thief, a local man who had planted evidence to frame the stranger. The young couple was cleared, and like Lucas before them, they chose to settle in Rawlins, finding work and beginning to build a life. It was the first of many such interventions. Over the years that followed, Lucas and Zelda Quinn became known as people who would help the wrongly accused, who would look at evidence with clear eyes and speak truth to power. They never asked for payment, considering it their way of paying forward the gift Zelda had given Lucas that day in 1876. Their children grew and began lives of their own. James did become a lawyer, specializing in defending those who could not afford proper representation. He married a schoolteacher from Denver and brought her home to meet his parents, a bright woman who fit perfectly into the family. Grace chose to stay at Hope Springs Ranch, working alongside her father, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day training work as Lucas grew older. She married a young rancher from a neighboring property, a good man who respected her skills and independence. The younger boys found their own paths, Thomas becoming a veterinarian and William a writer, documenting the history of Wyoming territory and the stories of the people who had built it. All of them, in their own ways, carried forward the values their parents had instilled: justice, hard work, courage, and compassion. By the turn of the century, Lucas and Zelda were grandparents many times over, their house filled with the sound of grandchildren during holidays and summers. They had slowed down somewhat, letting the younger generation take on more of the ranch work. But they were still active, still engaged in their community, still deeply in love. One evening in the summer of 1900, exactly 24 years after that first meeting, Lucas and Zelda sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. They were both gray now, their hands gnarled from decades of hard work, but they still fit together perfectly, Lucas's arm around Zelda's shoulders, her head resting against his chest. 24 years, Zelda mused. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime. Sometimes it feels like no time at all. Both, Lucas agreed. A lifetime of days, each one precious. But also, it all went so fast. I look around and see our grandchildren running through this house we built, and I can hardly believe we created all this. We did, Zelda said with satisfaction. From nothing. From a false accusation and a moment of courage. We built all of this. You built it, Lucas corrected gently. If you had not spoken up that day, I would be dead, hanged by an angry mob for a crime I did not commit. Everything we have, everything we are, exists because you had the courage to stand up for a stranger. And you had the courage to stay, Zelda replied. To prove yourself, to build a life, to love me and our children so completely. We built this together, Lucas. Every bit of it. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over land they had worked for a quarter century. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, Grace's voice calling them in for supper, the sound of horses in the pasture. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had not come to Rawlins that day? Zelda asked. No, Lucas said immediately. Because I think, somehow, I was always meant to come here, meant to be falsely accused that day. Meant to hear your voice cutting through that angry crowd, speaking truth when everyone else was ready to believe the worst. I think maybe everything in my life before that was just preparation, just moving me toward the moment when I would meet you. That is very philosophical, Zelda said with a smile. I have had 24 years to think about it, Lucas replied, smiling back. 24 years to be grateful every single day that you were brave enough to speak up, that you gave me a chance to prove myself. That you fell in love with a drifter with nothing but a horse and a dream. You were never just a drifter, Zelda said firmly. You were always this man, the one who built Hope Springs Ranch, who raised our children with patience and love, who helped so many others who were wrongly accused. You were always this man. I just saw it before everyone else did. Because you heard my voice, Lucas said quietly, echoing words from long ago, and knew I was telling the truth. And you heard mine, Zelda replied, and knew I was your future. As darkness fell and the stars came out, they remained on their porch, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded anything either of them had dared to dream. Inside, their family gathered for supper, voices raised in laughter and conversation, the sound of home and love and legacy. Years continued to pass, each one building on those that came before. Lucas and Zelda aged gracefully, their love deepening with time rather than diminishing. They remained active in their community and their families' lives, offering wisdom and support as their children raised children of their own. In 1905, on a warm July afternoon very much like the one when they had first met, Zelda and Lucas celebrated their 50th anniversary. Their children organized a party that seemed to include half of Wyoming, people coming from across the state to honor the couple who had become legendary in their own right. The story of how they met had been told and retold, becoming part of the history of Rawlins itself, a reminder that courage and justice could triumph over prejudice and fear. During the celebration, James, now a prominent lawyer and judge, stood to make a toast. My parents taught me many things, he said, looking at Lucas and Zelda with obvious love. They taught me to work hard, to treat others fairly, to stand up for what is right even when it is difficult. But most of all, they taught me about love, real love. The kind that lasts not because it is easy, but because two people choose each other every day for a lifetime. They built something extraordinary from nothing, and in doing so, they gave all of us an example to live by. The crowd raised their glasses and Lucas and Zelda stood together, still side by side after all these years. Lucas spoke briefly, thanking everyone for coming, for being part of their lives, for helping to build the community that had given him a second chance. And then Zelda spoke, her voice still clear and strong at 71. 50 years ago, I heard a man speak the truth and recognized it instantly, even though everyone around me was ready to believe the worst. I have often thought about that moment, about what gave me the courage to speak up for a stranger. I think it was my father's voice in my head, telling me that silence in the face of injustice is the same as condoning it. But I also think it was something else, something I felt in that moment, a recognition that this man, this wrongly accused drifter, was going to be important to my life. I did not know how, but I knew it absolutely, and I was right. Lucas Quinn became everything to me. My husband, my partner, my best friend, the father of my children, the builder of our home. Everything good in my life flows from that moment when I chose to speak truth instead of staying silent. So my advice to all of you, especially the young people, is this: when you see injustice, speak up. When you recognize truth, defend it. And when you meet someone who makes your heart recognize something important, do not let fear or convention or other people's opinions keep you from pursuing that connection. Love and justice are worth fighting for, always. The applause was thunderous, and more than a few people were wiping away tears. Lucas took Zelda's hand and kissed it, his eyes saying everything that words could not. They continued living fully into their 70s, active and engaged, though they gradually handed over the ranch operations entirely to Grace and her husband. Hope Springs Ranch continued to thrive, a testament to what they had built, now being managed by the second generation and beginning to involve the third. Lucas passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1908, at the age of 66. He had been working with a young horse that afternoon, still doing what he loved, and had gone to bed that night with Zelda beside him, as he had for over 30 years. He simply did not wake up, his heart giving out after a lifetime of steady, faithful beating. Zelda grieved deeply, but without despair. She had been loved well and completely for over 3 decades, and she held that love close as she navigated the pain of loss. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her, offering comfort and support, and she found solace in the life they had built together, the legacy that would continue long after both of them were gone. She lived another 7 years, remaining sharp and engaged, telling stories about Lucas to grandchildren and great-grandchildren who had never met him, keeping his memory alive. She continued the work they had started together, helping the wrongly accused, speaking up for justice, being a voice of wisdom and courage in her community. On a warm July afternoon in 1915, nearly 40 years to the day after she had first heard Lucas Quinn speak his name in that dusty street, Zelda passed away surrounded by her family. She was 81 years old, and her last words were a smile and a whisper. "I hear your voice, Lucas. I am coming home." They buried her next to Lucas on a hill overlooking Hope Springs Ranch, under 2 cottonwood trees they had planted together in those early years. Their graves became a place of pilgrimage for young couples starting out, people who had heard their story and wanted to pay respects to a love that had triumphed over everything. The ranch continued to flourish under Grace's management, and eventually her children's. The techniques Lucas had developed for working with horses became the foundation of training methods that spread across the West. The work he and Zelda had done helping the wrongly accused inspired James to establish a legal aid society that continued for generations. Their story was written down by William, the son who became a writer, and published in 1920. It became a bestseller, spreading far beyond Wyoming, inspiring people across the country with its tale of courage, justice, and enduring love. The book was titled The Voice of Truth, and it ensured that Lucas and Zelda Quinn's story would never be forgotten. Hope Springs Ranch remained in the family for generations, each successive owner maintaining not just the land and the buildings, but the values that Lucas and Zelda had established. They kept records of all the people the Quinns had helped over the years, hundreds of wrongly accused individuals who had been given second chances, whose lives had been changed by the courage of two people who understood what it meant to fight for justice. The town of Rawlins grew and changed with the decades, but the story of the day Zelda Hammond had spoken up for a wrongly accused drifter remained central to its identity. Schools taught it as local history. Parents told it to their children as a lesson in courage. Young people in love visited the graves on the hill, asking for blessings on their own relationships, hoping to build something as lasting as what Lucas and Zelda had created. Because that is what they had done in the end. From a single moment of courage, from one woman's refusal to stay silent in the face of injustice, from a man who heard her voice and recognized his future, they had built something extraordinary. A love that lasted a lifetime. A family that continued for generations. A legacy of justice and compassion that touched countless lives. A ranch that still stood, solid and prosperous, over a century later. And on warm July afternoons, when the wind blew just right across Hope Springs Ranch, people swore they could sometimes hear voices on the breeze. A man and a woman laughing together, still in love, still together. Their story echoing through time as proof that courage, justice, and true love can triumph over anything.